Now, in the last session, I was trying to give an overview of the deployment part, and pretty much I got stuck. And before that, we were actually looking at into the multi-modules, and in that we were looking at how you can create separate modules where each of the module will be treated as a separate Maven project, and how you can handle everything together. How do you set dependencies? And as a dependencies has, how is that you will be running completely as a project which will take care of the build order as well as building the individual components. So in that, I was trying to give you an example of using a application server like JBoss, and in that there was a particular plugin called as JBoss as Maven plugin, using which we will be able to connect to a JBoss application server. So what happened yesterday was, by default, JBoss needs Java 1.7. Okay, and for one of the requirement, I had updated my machine to use Java 1.8. So that is why yesterday it got stuck. So practically, to continue the same thing, now if you just start up the JBoss on the same machine wherever it is running, you can access it using the default port 9990 on the host machine, or you can just say localhost 9990 and you will be able to connect to the application server that is running. So that way, if you get in, you can see that now I am just logged into the JBoss application console from the URL or the web page. And in this, you see a page called deployments or manage deployments, where you can put all your deliverables. So basically, when I say deployment, what it means is whatever that we build from our project here. So if I build this as my artifact or deliverable for the project or the module, then if I do a deployment, this particular artifact will be copied from your current build location and it will be put into the application server, where we are trying to see the same thing from our URL by accessing the web page for the JBoss application server. So this is what we are going to mean by deployment, where if a user wants to run, they would have been set it in such a way that you can access this jar file and start using your application. So basically, deployment is all about, you will have an application server like this, in which from your current build location, you're going to copy, or in terms of the build management, we call it as deploy, where you put it into a specific application server. Okay, so that way, now this was the example that I was trying to show you, where we have to use the plugin. So if you are going to use the plugin, as I said, you need to define the structure, and in which you have to first give the GAV of it, and then if you do not want to attach this plugin to any particular phase, then we are going to directly call the what it has to do by giving the configuration. Okay, so that way, let me show you which we did it yesterday. So now you can see in this, I don't have any other plugin. So I have defined the structure in which it starts with the tag name called build, under which plugins, under which there is one particular plugin, and the GA of the plugin that we will be getting it from our application servers usage page. And in that, now I'm just giving the information where the configuration value will be specifically a tag called JBoss home. And in the JBoss home, you have to specify where exactly you have installed the JBoss, or how you are going to access it. In my case, I have installed the JBoss application server on my own machine, so I'm giving the complete path. If you are trying to access the JBoss which is available on some other machine, then you will be giving the URL like how I have accessed the application server. The same way, you will specify the URL to access it. So that's the difference on where exactly the JBoss is installed. And then importantly, what file you are trying to deliver in the terms of deployment, where you will be giving the GAV of that particular project. So currently, I want to do the deployment of the same deliverable of this project. So simply if I copy the GAV of this, it is going to consider that there is a jar file or whatever package specific to this project with the same GAV name. It is going to connect to this particular application server and deploy. Okay, so this is what we are supposed to do. But now, since I have not attached this particular plugin to any of the phase, the only option to call is by directly invoking the goal associated to it. So how will I know what is the goal associated? Pretty much if you go back to the home page of that plugin, you can see it will give you the list of particular goals that is available for that plugin. So in our case, we are interested to do a deployment. So that way you can make use of any one of the goal, both are one and the same, where you can choose any one and call that. Okay, so now what is that we have done? We have a project module called module 2, and in that I have added one plugin which is going to connect through this project to the JBoss application server, which is available in this location. And using that, we are going to tell the goal as deploy, where automatically it is going to take the artifact that you're going to build here and then do a deployment into it, so that after deployment, if you refresh, you can see that is put inside the JBoss application server, which we have connected. Okay, so now for that, now I have to call this as the goal for doing the deployment. Okay, so now if I go to the project in the same directory as where we have the pom.xml, now I will just call this goal name. So now internally, this deploy is actually going to invoke the standard deploy phase of your lifecycle. That is the last phase that we had, right? So that is going to internally get called by this, because when you say deployment, deployment is dependent on making sure the deliverable is available. So that is how when you call a deploy goal of a specific plugin, even though it is going to do a deploy, it is going to attach itself to the specific deploy and check whether do you have any specific package which is not available, and if it is not available, then it has to create. So that is how we are not going to attach specifically the deployment plugins to any of the phase, because internally it is going to call or act as the deploy phase or the last phase of your Maven's lifecycle. Okay, so now if you enter, pretty much you can see it is going to come from the first, where it is going to check whether everything is compiled. In case if it is not compiled, then it is going to compile and then do the test. And we now know that if it is already done, then Maven is going to just skip those steps and keep moving, but it is going to come from the default lifecycle from the beginning. Okay, and at the end, it is going to create the jar file. What is the jar file? It is going to create, that is the name of the project hyphen the version dot the packaging type. So in our case, it is going to create mod2 hyphen 1.0 snapshot dot jar. And where that will be present? It will be present under the target folder of the same project. Okay, and now finally, after it has created, what is the next step? It is going to basically deploy, and that you can see it is trying to use this plugin, and in that it is connecting specifically to the application server that you have given, in which it is trying to deploy this package or the artifact or deliverable. Okay, and because of that, now if you go back to your application server and refresh, you can see that it has been deployed. Okay, so this is what practically we mean by deploying, where you can either deploy one file or you can deploy multiple files depending on your project. So wherever it is needed, you can call it or invoke it. Same way, if you want to call any other goal, for example, I want to undeploy, then corresponding to it, you are going to call this plugin's goal. So now in this, if I call Maven and undeploy, pretty much now it is going to quickly run, and whatever the package that is there, it is going to deploy. But still, it is going to come from the beginning because it is part of your deployment phase. That is how it is once again going to create, but finally it is not going to put into the application server, but try to remove from that. So now if you go to this and refresh, you can see it will not be available. So that is how you keep this particular goal as a separate goal, and only when you are completely fine with the testing, and only when you say that the candidate what you are building or the changes what you are building is good for a release, that is when you will go ahead and do a deployment, or whenever it is necessary you will be invoking it separately. Okay, so that's why the first three phases, that is what and all: compile or resource generation, compile, and test and package is the most common that you will be doing. And when you will be invoking the install phase, whenever we have a requirement where there is a dependency, then we will be going ahead with the particular phase called install. And other than that, the deployment is once again only when, as part of your project, the deliverable what you're creating is a web application, and that you want to put into your production environment or a testing environment where further functional testing has to be done. Only then you will be doing the deployment. So that's how we keep it separate, where you will have a specific plugin. Either you can use Apache, or as we have seen just some time back, you can use JBoss application server or any other server. Only thing that you Lokesh, can you please go on mute? Thank you. So as we have specific to an application server, you have to give the plugin details, and specific to that, whatever configurations that you need, you can find it from the homepage of that, and then try to put it up and set the specific value on what file you want to give. And in that, once again, as we saw, you are going to compare and give every value about a project only through GAV. So if you say that you are working and you want Maven to identify a project, it is always using the GAV. That is why it is quite important. Not only this, going forward, any tool or any plugin that you want to attach to your Maven's project. Now, like this, I'm showing you deployment. Later on, if you want to do some other process as part of your build and you want to add another tool to the build lifecycle, then everything is based on the GAV. So once we know that, we can keep adding it wherever it is dependent or as a plugin, and you will call it. Getting it? Now, whatever that I'm showing you is just one part. Later on, when we go with Jenkins and when we do the continuous integration and deployment, we will see we don't even have to do this much. It'll be quite very easy to integrate everything through Jenkins. In that, how you'll be calling Maven. Okay, so try to understand the concept, and if you have any doubt, please let me know so that I can repeat it. Is that clear on what you mean by an automation in terms of deployment? And if needed, what is that we have to do?
Adam,
Yes.
can we have install in our local machine the JBoss? Then we can try the same plugin in our machines, or you have? I mean, do you have any software the JBoss?
Uh, there's nothing, not much complicated. Okay, if you want, I can send you the steps. So there are two things which we have to do. When you're installing JBoss, you can simply download. Okay, I'll just show you. Okay, when you're working on specifically JBoss, you need to understand there are two versions of JBoss. One is 1.7, and later on, whatever the latest version is there, like 1.8 or going forward, it is not called as JBoss. They call it as Wildfly. Okay, so don't get confused. Whatever that I am using is JBoss 1.7. If you're trying to use latest version, then it is not called as JBoss, but they have renamed it to Wildfly. Okay, so when you want to install this, download JBoss 1.7, and then if you go here, you'll be getting particular package. Now for Windows, which I'm using, you can download the zip file. Okay, you don't have to download the tar because it's in Windows. Download the zip. And once you download the zip, you have to do two things. You have to create an account and then run some file. So that I'll send you a document. Okay, so that you just try to do. All you have to do is extract it, and inside it, you have to create an account for this particular application server, as well as you need to run a file called standalone. That is what I have run here. So you just have to run. But for it, the requirements that you need is you need to have Java 1.7 version. That is more important because the JBoss 1.7 works only on Java 1.7. So just remind me after the class. I'll send you the instructions on how to install Java 1.7 and what and all configurations you need and how do you start up. Okay, so that you can practice it on your own laptop.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions? Is that clear on the deployment side? Kavya, Hari, Nagesh. Okay. So coming to the last part. Now, we saw that how is that we are going to create a product or build a product, do some verification, and then once everything is fine, if needed, how is that you're going to do a deployment into a particular application server? That I just showed you a simple example. Now, once everything is done, what is the next step? You're going to do a release, where when you're saying you're going to do a release, there are a lot of release activities that you have to do as a project. Okay, so let's not focus that management activities as of now. I'm going to focus majorly whatever is needed for doing a release management in terms of your build system. So that is when we decide that we are going to do a release, what is the difference that we have to do on the build system? The first thing is whatever package that we create, we have to put a version number because that is what we are going to actually give it to the customer. So whatever that we have given so far is to the QA, where either as a developer, a person can create only a particular package, or we are going to create a deliverable and give it to the QA for testing. So finally, when we've realized that a particular change is good and it is a release candidate, which means that it is good to give it to the customer, then we have to do certain changes and create a deliverable or artifact once again. So that way, what we have to do is at this point of time, we should be knowing what is the version number that we are going to use for doing a release or a build. So that ultimately we are going to update in each of the version. So that is when you have to update the version number in all the modules and all the pom.xml or the configuration files that we have in the project. So that way, how many pom.xml do we have in our project?
3.
Yes, so we have one parent POM, and then for each of the module, you have one POM, correct? So now in each one of them, you have to go and update the version with the snapshot and put the specific version which you are going to use for doing the release. Okay, so this is the time that you are going to apply the specific release, because until now we were doing only the development activity. So now when you finalize, you have to update. But the trickiest part here is it is a simple thing where I can open a file and change this to a particular release string name. But if you look very carefully, This is not the only place where you have the version information, because anything that you refer to a project in terms of dependencies or plugin, everywhere we have referred the same version number, right? So in that case, now if you look for the deployment, we have used a version. If you go to the module one, we have specified the dependency of the module, and for that you have given this, isn't it? So everywhere it has to be updated. Not only that, even here for the parent definition you have specified. So you have to make sure wherever is the version reference that you are having, specifically that version number has to be given. Now that is the point where we need to know. Now, if you have many modules in your project and the dependencies are more, then it will not be easy to keep changing, because even if you miss one, it will be a difficult thing. Or by mistake, if you update something else, wherein for some other package, if you just update it with a release, even then it is going to fail as a build, because it will not able to find the right file or will not be able to pick the right file. So that is when once again, we will be using a default plugin which is available. So that default plugin which Maven works on is called as versions set, where this is a default goal name which Maven is going to use for updating all the version tag from all the related pom.xml files in the project. Okay, so for this, you're going to call Maven versions colon set, which means the goal is to set the version or update the version on all the project files. For that, what is the version number that you're going to update? So that you are going to specify it using a variable. Okay, so what do we mean by -d here is you are passing an argument to the Maven, where you are saying call this goal and pass this value to a variable. So what will happen when Maven is running and it is trying to call this goal? For the version, it is going to use the variable here and set whatever value you have set or you have given. And this value will be taken and it will be updated in all the pom.xml automatically. Okay, so let's try to run this and see. Now, once again, when you're trying to run this, from where will you run? I don't have to run it from a module, but I'll run it from our parent project folder where we have the parent pom, because anything that I pass, it will be automatically passed on to all the modules. And in terms of what build order it has to modify, it has to pass it on with the proper build order. Okay, so that way, if you pass, and let's say that I want to release some number, okay, some release number that I'm using, where 2 is the major release, 3 is the minor release, and 1 is the patch number or the build, which means this is the first build for the minor release which you have given 3 times for the parent release of the second time. So that is what it means 2.3.1. So now what happens? As per the workflow, it will create the build order and it will go through all the modules one by one and it will pass the same goal, where you can clearly see it is updating the project from 1.0 snapshot to the new version number that we have set. And now you can see everything is automatically updated, where wherever the dependencies are there, it will automatically update everywhere. So we don't have to tell each and everything. So Maven is smart enough to understand and update everything. Okay. Now here it's going to run. So once you have run everything, specifically in the deployment here, it's not taking. So I have to tell this. Now why it is didn't take, because once again, deployment is not the delivery what you're doing. Delivery is only creating a package. So that's why anything related to the normal build process of creating a package, it's going to update. But if you want to add the delivery also to it, then you have to first call the package, create the artifact, and then go ahead and do the deployment as a second step. Okay. Now, it is not yet directly updated, because if you go to the project and you can see that it has actually taken a backup and updated everything. because whenever there is a backup, you can always refer back to it. Okay, same way all the modules pom.xml will be taken a backup, and in fact your parent pom. Also has been taken as a backup. So now if you try to run your project, now this time I will do a Maven clean and then do a package. But before that I have to do a install. So now what it will do, it will try to delete all the previous files, and based on the build order, it is going to first build the module 2, and for the module 2 it is going to create module 2-2.3.jar, and with respect to that then it is going to create the module 1-2.3.1.jar. Okay, so now if you look, both these files will be specifically available under the target folder. Am I audible to everyone? Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, Adams.
Nagesh, seems to be a problem. Can you please reconnect? Okay, so now you can see the file that we have created is with the new version, and internally if you try to extract it, whatever the references inside this will also be referring to the version number. So it's not just creating the name. Internally the files whatever we have will also be created, because if you remember in the first session I was trying to show you by converting it and extracting it, so you had a manifest file inside it, so that will also be having the version stamping. So that's how when you run any project you'll be getting a specific version. So that's the reason we do. And if you go back to module 1, even this you will be having. So now these individual files as a project, or based on what release you are going to do, you can pick a particular module or a component and then you give it to your customers or to the tech support who is going to give it to the end users or the customers as a project. So like this, any point of time if you want to do the changes, rather than we doing it manually, we can make use of a plugin, because everything now when you're working as a DevOps engineer, you should think about how you can simplify. Sometimes people would ask this question that, hey, it is just a simple task. Why do you want to run something specifically? Yes, you will never know whether it is a simple task or it is a complicated task unless and until you start modifying, because every time when you do manually, there's always going to be some kind of error that might happen, or there are chances for error, and you're always going to spend a lot of time. So that is when focusing on the DevOps side, you should always think, even if it is a small task, how is that you can automate? How much of manual effort can be reduced from it? So that's how you can do. And second, if we are handing the project over to someone else, even they should be easily take care of it. So for that, if I tell him to run one command, he should be able to do. If not, we cannot educate anyone by doing everything manually. So that's how focus on automation as much as possible, because on the operations as a DevOps engineer, it is the most important thing on how much of time that you can reduce. We cannot keep saying that I will take a lot of time to doing manually. So that's the focus, to do it automatically. Okay. Now, once the release is done, the next thing what is that we have to do? We have to decide whether are we going to continue the development on this project, or we are almost done with this. We don't need this project folder anymore, or the repository corresponding to this anymore. So in case, let's say that you're not going to do any more release, then you can use the same plugin and you can call a goal called commit, where this will try to permanently store it by removing it. And then since you have modified the file, you can go ahead and do the commit of this pom.xml along with it. But ideally, we will not be doing only a release and nothing much, because we will be start working on a newer requirement, or you are going to work on a new fix what you have given. So like this, the development activity will continue. So that is when we would be interested to go back to the development copy of your pom.xml, which refers to the version as 1.0 snapshot. So that way, To just revert everything, simply use the goal called as revert for the same plugin. So simply now in this, if you call Maven versions and revert, it is going to delete the backup and rename the content of that into the original one. So that now if you go and look everywhere, it is going to update it. Okay. Now one place where you can see that wherever the reference is there, everywhere it is done. Basically what it has done is it has deleted or it has moved the backup pom.xml to the original. So it has deleted the existing pom and moved the backup to the original name. So that is how you can see everything is back. Okay, so this is how whenever you want to do a release, at that point of time, you update the version and then do a build once again, so that you will create a new package, and then whatever is the release process, you will be handling it to the customer. So I'll talk more about what is the release process and what you do a little later. But for now, as part of the build management, if you have a requirement for marking a build as a release candidate, then just update the version whenever is needed that you have to do a release, and then rerun the same build step where it will create the new package with the specific version number or the version ID. Getting it? Any questions?
That when we are using that commit versions commit.
Versions commit is nothing but the reverse of revert. I am just going to keep it permanently. That is when, let's say that you are not using this
Oh,
project anymore. This is the last.
after releasing, we can commit, right? I mean, we are not going to develop
Yeah,
anything the
it is
same.
up to our wish. Exactly. It is nothing.
Okay.
It is nothing related to the release. Whether you want to continue with the same file with the modified changes on the POM, or you want to go back to the development. So now if you say that I am obsoleting the product, this is the last release, I'm not going to use the product anymore, then go ahead and do a commit. Or let's say that you don't want to use the repository going forward for that project, then you can go ahead and do a commit, because at any point of time when you are going back as a Git workspace, if you have done this modification, it would be called as a unmodified file, or it would have been called as a modified file, right? So better go ahead and do a commit where permanently you have changing and store it into the repository. So that's how it's just for a process where you maintain. Don't just change it for one time and leave it, because anytime when you work on a build management, you should be able to reproduce things. So that is how we keep a track of each and everything that we are modifying. So depending on your need, you will go ahead and do the commit and make it permanent, or just simply revert back to the snapshot and start continuing with your new development activity.
Whenever I do the commit, where it will store exactly those artifacts, I mean the internal repository that I am to.
It is not a commit of Git. Commit is just a name where it is going to delete
Uh,
the backup and leave it as it is. Getting it?
okay, okay, okay.
So you have to actually do a git commit, because only when you do a git commit, you are going to store a repository, because until now, Maven is not coming to the git. It is only taking the files, whatever you have in the directory structure, and it is going to work. It is not related to the git commit. Commit means you are saying that I don't need any backup. Keep this itself as the permanent one. That's what it means.
Okay.
Okay. So one of the last phases that we were trying to look is, if you go through the Maven's default lifecycle, we saw a couple of them. And in that, we saw two phases, which is not part of the default lifecycle phase. One is clean and the other one is site. So until here, whatever that we saw is the default build plugins only. And this is the only one which we call as a non-build plugin type, or the other type of plugin where whatever is needed for the documentation we will be calling here. So what does this phase called site do? So basically, when you're working on a project, okay, now from the development team, they have to create a document which describes their project behavior or the build nature. So that is when, rather than we writing some kind of file, we can make use of Maven, where since Maven is based on Java and it is going to run on Java projects only, it can create the complete structure of your project in terms of how it is working, what and all are the dependencies, and what and all are the libraries that it is needed, where is the source, everything it will keep a track, wherein you can create a documentation automatically using this goal. And for that, it will be internally using a particular documentation plugin and call. So that is how you will just do it once in the time when you have done the complete release, a major release, or let's say for your tracking purpose or for auditing purpose. Regularly after the release, when you have done, you will create a site and it will try to create certain HTML page which will act as the documentation, and that you will again store it into the repository, so that anything that you want you can track in the repository like Git. So you create the documentation and store it for every releases. Okay, so that's when, whenever it is needed for a release, or if you want to hand over this for auditing purpose or for some other project reference when they want to know, you can give this documentation. That will be helpful. So simply, if you go to your project and run Maven site, once again, it is a not part of the default lifecycle. So it will not call any other goal or phase of the lifecycle. It will only create the documentation. And how it will create? Based on the same dependency cycle, it will first go to module 2, generate all the details. You can see it is generating each and every information. And then it will go to the another module, that is module 1, and it will generate all the details about the dependency, what and all are the information about the project, what plugins you have used, everything will be put up there. Now, where is the documentation created? So now, once again, as a project, we will be getting a folder called target, and in that you will be seeing the output. So that is how, for the first time, for your parent project, you have a target folder created, because inside this target, you are not going to put a jar file or var file, because the parent POM is not going to do any compilation. But now, since you have created a documentation, there will be a folder called site, and inside that you will be having all the details. So now if you go to this, you can pretty much see all the dependencies that you have. The same way in each one of them, if you go internally, you will be having a target folder, and in that you will be having a site, and each one of them will be having a specific detail. Okay, so it will give what is the dependencies and internally what and all it's been using. Same thing. Now, if I go back to module 1 and site, and in the site, if I take this, the index is going to be the first file which will be having a reference of all the other projects. So here you can have a complete details about, for the compilation, this is what I need, right? So if you remember, we do an install so that when I'm compiling module 1, it requires module 2. And what is that exactly? It is going to need this GAV and the type of the file jar. And for that, it also depends on the default JUnit, that is the Maven project. And additionally, these are the tree in which it is going to search and all the other details that is needed. Okay. And where is your default central repository from which you're going to pick up? So all the details about the project will be available in this documentation. So now, if you are interested to store, all we have to do is take a copy or just take this and store it in a particular location or somewhere in the repository itself. Now, when you take as a project, you will be having the entire folder as your repository, and that itself, somewhere you can create one more folder and store all the site, because the entire target folder will be called as a untracked one, because this is not something we'll be storing. What we will be storing in the Git repository when you do the modification, the complete module folder, and inside it whatever you have other than the target. So for Maven, what is needed? The src folder and the pom.xml, only these two things, and the internals, whatever we have internally, the structure we will be storing. So make sure that you take the copy of the specific site folder in each of the module or the parent and store it somewhere in the repository separately. So that's how for each release or whenever we need it for auditing purpose, we will be generating the documentation. Getting it? Now, when we are working on Maven, there are certain command line options that we will be using, so that if you want to do any enhancements or any advanced concepts or topics, then it will be quite useful. So that way, now, okay, there is one more topic that we need to understand. But before that, is it clear so far on how will you call a plugin and how will you invoke with terms of project? Because if I want to explain this, there is a concept which you need to first understand on what is the plugin and how you are going to invoke. Is that clear? Now, I'm going back to this example where, if you remember or recall, we used a plugin called exe Maven plugin, in which we were trying to actually run a plugin or call a plugin directly, correct? Now let's say I'll go to the module 2, and in that for some time, now let me add one more plugin. Okay, so now in this project we have two plugins, and both of the plugins is not attached to any phase. So if I want to call, I will be calling it directly, or if I want, I will be attaching it to a phase, correct? Now let's take the example where I am attaching a particular plugin to a phase. Okay, now in this, let's say this one. Okay, let me take this example also. Now I'm going to put all of them under the project. So now we have three plugins defined in our project. Okay, and in that, now this particular plugin is associated with the clean phase, correct? So whenever I'm going to call Maven clean, what it is going to do? Okay, now how do I call this directly? Maven clean, and I'm interested to call this module directly. How will I do? I will say PL and the module name. So now what it is doing, it is trying to call the particular phase of the plugin and attach it to this. You have a particular additional plugin which is calling, right? Now, to put it exactly, this is what I did last time. I just added two more lines to this way. This is what we did, right, last time. So now if I run this, see, I'm just trying to combine everything and I'm trying to show you as a project. So after doing the clean, it is basically calling this. Now, this is what the standard that we understood so far on how this is going to get called and when I invoke this. Okay, to make it simpler, not to confuse, let me go inside module 2 and run it. Maven clean, and it will call the clean phase and it will call the plugin attached to it, correct? Now, if I don't want to attach to it, then I will remove this and I will try to call this plugin directly by whatever goal is associated. Okay. Now, that way, if I want, I can attach it and then call. And if I don't want, I remove it and directly call. That is what we learned. But what if there is a scenario where you want both of them? What do I mean both of them? That is, basically, I want the plugin to be attached to a face, and if I want, I should be able to invoke, and if I don't want, I should not be invoking it, which means how is that you are going to change the behavior of Maven where, for example, if I say clean now, it should be calling clean if I tell to it use the clean. If not, it should not be calling the plugin. So sometimes you are going to have such a kind of requirement where even though you have attached a plugin to a face, you should be calling it only if you like. But as of now, that scenario is not happening, or we didn't go through this because whenever if I attach a face to a plugin, by default, if I call plugin, it is basically going to call this at the end of this face, correct? So now, how is that you can now tell to Maven what is your interest, and based on that interest, either it should be executing it or it should not be calling. So in order to tell to Maven in such a way, we need to configure the same project in a little different way. Okay, and for that, what we are going to do is we are going to use a concept called as profiles. Okay, now what does I mean, what do you guys think basically by the term profile? Once again, have you ever used this word called profile? Have you seen it anywhere? What comes to your mind when you say profile? The word called profile, Profile. Anyone? Have you ever came through this word called profile? Yes, anyone? Does everyone use Facebook? I hope so, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever used profile in it?
Mm,
Okay. You keep changing your profile photo, right? DP,
yeah.
display picture. That is
Yeah.
also a profile. So what basically you mean by profile? Yeah, Nagesh, as you said, or Hari. So you are trying to give only a specific data to a person. You are not giving everything to everyone. So that's how the same Facebook or LinkedIn, you can choose what is the configuration you want to do, and only that particular people can say. So you can choose the list of content in the page that you want only your friends to be seeing it, or the friends of friends, or anyone who comes to your page and he wants to look at your profile, they will be able to see. So you can configure it differently, right? Even though it is the same content you have, you can choose by configuring specifically saying that this content will be seen only by this person, or this content can be seen by all the other people. So something like that you can choose. And even exactly when you're trying to search for a job, you can say who can see your profile, and if you do not want, you will say no one should be seeing your profile. So something in the same term we can apply it to the Maven, where now I am saying, even though you have written the configuration and the plugin details, further you can configure the project in such a way that you can tell when Maven should be using and when not to be using it. So that is when we will be using a term or a functionality called as profile in Maven, where profile is nothing but simply a set of configuration which you will be trying to group together, using which you will be overwriting the default nature or the workflow of Maven. So by default, how does Maven work? If you call a specific goal, it will be working based on the lifecycle attached to it, and whatever is the procedure from the beginning, it will come. And In that, if you have any plugin attached to it, it will be calling that plugin at the end of the goal, right? Now, rather than doing it, if you try to group certain configuration, what configuration? Whatever that we are doing here, right? These are the actual configuration, writing plugins, defining dependencies. These things are called as configurations. So now you can group this plugins, which is nothing but the configuration, and you can give a name to it called profile, so that when you want to use that, you tell Maven to use the profile, only then Maven will be reading the configuration or the plugin details. If not, it will not be reading. So that is how you can now tell Maven on when to use a plugin and when not to use, or the same plugin can be invoked whenever you need, and if not, Maven will not even call it. Okay, so basically profiles are nothing but grouping your plugins together so that when you want, only then Maven will be reading it and calling it. Okay, I'll show you that how. Now, how is that you're going to set a profile? To set a profile, all you have to do is the plugins, whatever that you have added, you just put everything under one more tag name called as profiles, so that using this you can define a profile. So just like how we can have more than one plugin in your project, you can have more than one profile, and you can put as many plugins that you want, and based on each profile call, all the plugins which you have defined inside it will be called or read by the Maven and then execute based on that. So first, we'll have to create a profile tag name called as profiles. So now on top of your plugin, whatever that you want to group, you can create a profile here. So once again, it is not profiles, but profile. And under that, for each profile, you are going to create a new tag called as profile and put it under. Same way, for every tag that you're opening, since we are going to follow the XML format, you are going to close it. So here you will close it by profile, and everything together we are going to put it under profiles. Okay, and now in order to identify this particular profile, we have to give a name, and that we will be doing it using a keyword called ID. ID means you are using that string to identify a profile. So now here I'll simply give an ID, and you can give any name for it. I'm just using a sample called test. So what is the difference between what we have done now and what is that we had so far? So far, now when you ran Maven, everything was normal. So it used to read all the plugins, and based on that, if you have any dependency where you have attached a plugin to a goal, it was calling, correct? But now, since we have put all the plugins into a profile, unless and until we tell Maven to read this profile, it will not read. It is simply like it is not there in the file because it is not going to read. So only when you say Maven, you consider this profile, then it will come and read all the information. And based on that, whatever goal that you're invoking, if it matches, then it will call this plugin. Okay, so simply see the output now. It is calling, but now when I call clean, it will just execute only the clean phase. It will not execute the plugin because it is not reading the plugin. By default, it is not invoking the profile. That is why it is not reading any of the plugin inside it. Okay, and now how is that you will invoke a profile? When I say invoke a profile, it means you are trying to tell to Maven, now don't just run, but search for a profile name, whatever that you are interested. And if you see that, go inside it and read all the plugins within it. And based on that, you work. So to do it, we will be giving a option called as -P and followed by the name of the profile. So this means you are invoking the profile while you run Maven. So what Maven will do now is first it will read all the configuration inside and then decide based on this goal or the phase, what and all plugin that you have defined, that will call. You can see now it is calling. So that is how you can invoke a profile and choose what plugin to be called. So if you don't want, simply now, if I just say clean, it will never read that plugin that you have, no matter what. Others also. If you want to call exec, exec, it will say now, watch carefully, that there is no such plugin definition because you have given it inside your profile. Same thing now, if you invoke using your profile, it will read that plugin. So that is how, even when you go as a production lifecycle, you can prevent users from not using it directly. So only if you know, you can create a profile and you can ask a person to use. So that is how, by creating a profile, you are actually grouping the plugins as a single configuration. And when you invoke the profile, only then Maven will be calling. So now this way you can have both workflows where by default, whatever it has to do, it will take care. And if you want to invoke specific plugins only when you need, you will be calling it. So some of the examples that, let's say that you are trying to do the deployment. Okay. Now you will be doing the deployment to an application server. And now let's assume you want to do the deployment only when you do the release, not every time. So that way you can put it under a profile, and only when you are going to do the deployment as part of the release, you invoke. If not, whenever you run the phase, it will never call the deployment step at all. So that is how you can choose when you want to do. Or the same example, let's say you want to do the deployment for every build, but for testing or for normal build, when it is given for the QA for testing, you have to put into a testing environment or a application server running in a testing machine. Whereas when you do a release, you want to connect to a application server running on a production machine. So how can you do? So that is when the command you are going to execute is the same. If I say deploy, how it will know whether it has to pick the plugin specific to the production server or specific to the testing server. So that's when you can give different profile and choose which one to call based on your need. Okay, simply profile is all about grouping a configuration and deciding which plugin to call or not to call. Getting it? So sometimes it could be an interview question also, where what do you mean by profile and when do you use? So pretty much be clear. You are just trying to group a configuration in Maven and tell Maven when a plugin should be read or when not to be read. Getting it? So that's when we saw -d, where this is one of the command line option where if you want to pass an argument or define a property when you're running Maven, while running Maven, you want to set a property or a variable, you will be using the -d. In that, how did we do? We will basically say Maven and you call whatever goal you want, and in that goal -d, the name of the property or the variable, and then equal to the value that you want to assign. So this is how you will be setting a property during the runtime of your project. Okay, then if you want to invoke a profile, we will be using capital -p followed by the profile name, where we just now saw as an example, if you want a name of a profile called test to be invoked with whatever goal that you're going to call, you will say -p and name of the profile. Okay, now you have an option called -o. This is especially when you are trying to do some practice at home or offline. Now, if you remember the architecture of Maven, how is it going to work? The first thing it is going to do is take a list of resources, right? In that, if you do not have a file available on your local directory or a repository, what is it going to do? It is going to basically connect to the internet to the remote repository and try to download it to the local repository, right? So that is when for running Maven, pretty much you have to be online or the internet connection has to be there on the machine or the system in which you are trying. But in some cases, when you do not have the network or when you are working offline, then if you want to still run the Maven, then you can use -o, where -o specifies the Maven to work offline even without accessing the network. Okay, ultimately, if the file is not available on the local repository, it will fail, but at least if it is available, if it is needed, it will not go to the net and search. So that's how, if you want to work offline, pretty much it will work by passing a -o option. Okay, then you have an option called -f. Why do we need this? So when you're running Maven, now in Maven, if you look, I said when you want to call a Maven, you have to always call the Maven from a directory where you see the pom.xml. That is your parent project folder. So you need to call Maven from the same directory as you have the pom.xml. Because by default, when you run Maven, it will search for the current directory, and in that directory, if it is having a pom.xml, it will take and run. But sometimes you might be keeping this pom.xml somewhere else. So if you have a requirement where you have the file on some other directory other than your current directory, then while invoking Maven, you will say -f and specify where exactly is your file, or if you're having some other file name other than the pom.xml. Now, the syntax is the file should be .xml file. If you want, I can keep the name of the project as demoadam.xml. It will still work, but Maven will not be picking it by default. So explicitly, you have to tell what is the new file that you are having other than the project default file, that is the pom.xml, so that it will try to read. So if you don't give, it will always assume in your current directory there is a file called pom.xml and it will read. But if that is not there, and if you want to explicitly say some other file, then you will use the -f and say that read this file. Okay, so that is when you will be using the -f. Now there's one more option called as -fn. Now specifically, when you're trying to run the Maven, when it goes through phase by phase, if one of the phases fail, then it will stop the run for the Maven at that point of time. So sometimes if you want to capture all the errors and you want to see whether it goes through all the phases, then you can say -fn. And what it will do is forcibly, it will try to go ahead and run all the phases of the project. No matter wherever it fails, it will be keep continuing and complete all the lifecycle phases until what you have set. So that's when, if you want to just proceed and see wherever it is going to fail, then you can use -n. Same way, you don't want to get all the general output. Okay, and you want to just the quiet output. Quiet means just show me only if it is an error. If not, don't give me all the normal way that it is going to run. Then what you can do is simply while invoking, you just give -q. So what it will do, it will not give all the messages as default. It will give the message only if there is an error. So q means quiet, or don't show all the output, show only if there is an error. The same thing reverse. Let's say if something is failing and you want to know the complete detail about it, then you will use a -x where you will be running the Maven in a debug mode. And now Maven will be giving you lots of lines of output so that you can see what exactly is being used and tracked. Because many times if a compilation fails, we will not be knowing where exactly it is failing. So you can rerun the Maven by passing -x, where it will completely tell step by step on what it is doing in terms of which plugin calling everything, which class file it is calling, and where exactly is failing. So that we can use it as a reference to debug, or if a developer is asking for further debug information when he's not clear by just looking at the output, you can use the -x and run. So the same thing now, if you run, you can see that it is just a normal clean that I ran. But by using -x, it is trying to give you the complete details about how Maven is calling each and everything and what and all it is doing, so that it will be easy for us to debug. So based on your requirement, you will be either using the debug mode or the quiet mode as the dependency happens. Okay. And there is one more thing and an advanced concept which I'll just touch base. Now, there is an option called -s where I have referred one more XML file. Now, in Maven, now can someone tell me what is the pom.xml? So if I say pom.xml, what is it? Basically, pom.xml is nothing but a configuration file specific to a project, correct? So that way, if you have some specific details for a project, you will be putting it inside the pom.xml. Like this, for each project, you will be having a pom.xml which will be local to the project. Local means specific only to that project. By that pom.xml, we will not be knowing any other information of a different project. So every project will have a pom.xml which is local to it. So now there are certain times where you want to set some kind of plugins which will be used for all the project. So if you want to set something globally for all the projects which you are going to invoke from the installation of the Maven on that machine, then there is one more file called as settings.xml. And where that will be available? That will be available under your Maven home directory. How can I get my Maven home directory? If you recall on the first session, we had used an environment variable called m2 home, which was actually referring to the place where we have installed Maven, right? So if you go to this, in this, you can see a folder called conf, and in the conf, you have a file called settings.xml. Now, this file acts as a global file for the Maven installation, which means now if I put anything in this settings.xml, it is going to be read by all the projects, so that if you have anything which every project is going to be needed, like the plugins, you can directly put it inside it. And if there is anything specific to the project, then you will use the pom.xml and put. So generally, things like username and password for connecting to a particular tool, those kind of things will be put under the settings.xml, so that the users will not be able to see. They will be thinking that they are connecting, but the actual username and password will be obtained from this. And also, all other global definitions will be in it. By default, the content of the file will be commented fully. So based on our requirement, we have to give. One of the example is, suppose if you want to change your local directory or the local repository to some other location. What is the default location? If you recall, the default local repository location is m2 home, and in that the user home's m2 folder, right? So now if you want to change this to some other location based on your requirement, then you will come here and you will uncomment this. So basically you will remove this, all these things you will uncommit, and now if you look, basically in this place you will replace with whatever the path which has to act as your local repository. So that is how, rather than using the physical path which is available on your hard disk, if you want to refer to some other location which could be a different tool itself, then you can refer that path. So that is how, whenever you are running Maven on your current machine, It'll always refer to this path, and it'll try to check whether all the libraries and dependencies is available. And if nothing is available, it'll try to download from the internet to this location. As well as when you have a dependencies and when you do a Maven install to this location, it'll be trying to copy. So that's how one of the specifications that you can use here is globally you can define a local repository. As well as I said, suppose if you have a server to which you want to connect, like an application server, and if you want to define a username and password, if you give it in your local pom.xml, what will happen? Any developer who is creating a workspace, he will also get a copy of the POM. So he will be able to see the username and password, that is the administration username and password. So by chance, he might go ahead and do some changes. So that is when, if we want, we can prevent it. How you can do? Pretty much, you can create a ID like this and you give a name, and in that you give a username and password and you store it here. And for whatever project, if you want to refer to this username and password, you simply put this ID at that location. Then wherever you have the ID, it will replace that with the username and password. So that's how we will be able to make sure the user doesn't know what is the username and password, but globally, no matter what project you are going to use with this installation of Maven, it will be using this value globally. Okay, so like this, it is not just the username and password. Now if it is defined, you can set the profile itself completely here. Profile means, as I said, rather than taking one plugin, or the same plugin has to be put for all the projects in my company. So rather than adding it for each project's pom.xml, I can globally define a profile and put it over here, so that from your machine, even though in your pom.xml, if you do not have a profile, if you try to call to invoke, it will be reading the global settings.xml and it will be reading it. So pretty much settings.xml will be used when you have something to be defined globally, or you have to override the default behavior. So that is when you will be using. So this is only for an advanced level where you want to change such a kind of behavior of local repository, or you want to set something as a global configuration for everything, then you will be adding it here. But as of now, for a regular automation, you don't need much, because as we go into Jenkins, we will be using everything from there. So we will be doing the configuration. But some project, if you're not using any tool like Jenkins and you're trying to manually build using Maven, then pretty much sometimes it might be needed. But if not, please do not change anything in the settings.xml. Anything that you change here is going to be global. That is how the behavior of Maven itself will be changed. Because the advantage on why we are using Maven is, if you follow the standard directory structure as well as the format of the plugin and the syntax, it is easy for us to follow the lifecycle, and Maven will handle everything. That's why it is quite easy. If not, it is going to be difficult. Okay, so that's the reason that now just understand, if there is a requirement where you don't want to use the standard settings.xml which is available in this location, because as a user he can always find out where is this installed, right? Because if a user says m2 home, he can easily capture where is the Maven installed, and from that I can go to the conf folder and read it. So rather than that, what you can do is you can put a settings.xml separately, and if you want to use that settings.xml instead of the default one, then during runtime, you can pass -s and call a particular settings.xml. So that is how not only the pom.xml, but also you can define your own settings.xml and call it. But if you have anywhere other than the default directory structure that is under the m2 home conf folder, then you will specify it using the -s. Okay, so remember, -f means you are specifying an alternate pom.xml, and -s, and you give a file name, you are specifying an alternate global settings.xml. Getting it?
Adam,
Yes.
Here you explained right that settings.xml file. For example, can we have the configure the local, I mean the internal repositories like Nexus, Artifactory in server profile and ID, the username, password, whatever you said, right? Can we do that in
Exactly.
settings.xml, right?
Exactly, that's what you will be doing. Now, if you have some tool like Nexus or Artifactory where you do not want the users to know where it is, then whatever the settings that you have to do for that, the plugin, if you go to each one of the tool, it will be trying to give you certain data that you try to put into your settings.xml. So pretty much you will be giving all the global level definition in terms of your project or a plugin or a repository that you want to connect in this.
Here I need to give that server tag and as well as the profiles also, right? I mean that ID whatever I have, like for example the snapshot and releases I need to mention here, right?
Exactly. So if you're talking specifically on Nexus, they have their own
Yes.
syntax. So that is when if you go to the Nexus tool on a particular project, right click, it will give a property. All you have to do is copy that particular property and come down and put it up under a profile or put it up under a repository here. So you will say what is the snapshot and what is the specific repository, release repository or the developer repository which you want to take. You just copy that property right from the Nexus page and put it here. That is what you will be doing.
I mean, based on that, can we store the executable files, the jar files, whatever we getting into store that internal repository, right? Like we have the like Maven goals, same thing. We have some other goals to related Nexus.
Yeah, if that is what your requirement, you can specify. See, you're not trying to limit anything that you cannot do. Now, why I'm not focusing here is I don't want to hard code anywhere in the Maven because during the runtime, I can change whenever I want. So that is when those ages or those days where hard coding everything in Maven is gone, because in a situation now where we are using Maven as one part of the process called continuous integration or continuous delivery. So that way I can use Maven or I can use Gradle or any other tool that I want and try to keep changing wherein everything should be flexible. So that way the same Nexus or Artifactory tool where you want to store everything, that is your jar file, you can set it up as a continuous integration workflow from Jenkins. So that's when, rather than doing everything here, when we go through the continuous integration or Jenkins, we will be seeing how you will be configuring where, rather than we connecting through Maven, you will invoke Jenkins. Jenkins will call Maven, and after calling the Maven, it will connect to the specific repository like Artifactory, and it will deploy or store everything there. So that is when we will be looking at it from the deployment or from the continuous deployment through Jenkins. So that's how we should focus on automating it.
Okay, instead of using here, we can use there the post build actions like, right?
Exactly. That is because that is more flexible and you have much easier option, because in this it's quite complicated and you are hard coding. If Maven is not there, nothing is going to work. But if you want to do any enhancement, you have to put in a lot of effort. So that is when, compared to Maven, now you have Jenkins, which you can use it for your continuous integration automation or continuous deployment, where with Jenkins, if I want, I can connect to Artifactory. With that, if I want, I can connect to an application server, everything, and I can have a handle, and it is easy when you have it as a UI, wherein everyone can look, and it's all about click and changing options, where it is easy to maintain. So that's how, as I said, when you're focused from a DevOps way, you should look at how easy everything is, not only for us to work, but also from terms of automation and maintenance. So that's way now,
Okay.
rather than using everything in Maven, because earlier, pretty much around 3 years or 4 years back when Maven was quite popular, we were trying to put everything in Maven and invoking Maven commands manually. But now, since we have popularity moving to the concept of continuous integration, and in that, when we are using Jenkins, we don't have to put everything in Maven, wherein we will use Jenkins as one-stop solution, and from that, we will be connecting to various other tools. So one among them is what we will be seeing here.
Okay.
Okay, so That's pretty much from the Maven specifically, but along with it, we also have certain more details. Now, I don't want to get into deeper of other things. So other than this, what are the other things that we need? Okay, like in terms of this testing and the code quality, we have a couple of things which I'll try to cover it in the next class. And with that, we will jump on to continuous integration, where we will not just look into continuous integration, we will understand what is the Jenkins tool as such, where and all we can use it, what are its future, and we'll get into the practicals and then come back. We will try to integrate Jenkins with Git, with Maven, and with all the other tools that we have in terms of code quality, Cobertura or uh, SonarQube or Artifactory, like what you are referring now, to deploy and store the jar file or your artifact into it. Everything will automate it using the Jenkins tool. Okay.
And one more thing, for example, you have created here a default jar, right? If I want to create var file, I need to mention in my pom.xml the package name var, or should I need any dependency like web.xml I need, right, whenever I created
Everything
a,
is needed.
var.
What you said is correct. Now, if you give it var here, for the var, it is not so stupid enough that Maven will create a var. No, when you say var, you need to create in your project in such a way that it will have all the dependencies that you need. So you need to have a web app folder, and in that you should have a config folder, and then you should put all the files related to it. Only then it will be creating. So that's how first you will specify the type of packaging here, and based on that, we have to create the project structure, because in this it is a simple structure. If you want to create a var file corresponding to it, in this folder you should be having not just the Java, but along with Java you should be having a web app folder, config, or all the other scripts needed to run your web application. So only then Maven will read and create your var file, because var is nothing but jar file, on top of that some more files specific to your web application. So everything should be defined. If not, it will give an error. I'll show you that also. Now, if you create it as a var, and if you try to execute it, this is module 2.
Actually, I tested, but it is failing. It is asking some web.xml
Exactly.
file.
That is because you are just saying var, but for the var, you need certain other details. It is not the Java file, because a simple jar means what you need only certain class files or a Java files from which it can create. But when you say a web application, that is the var, you need the jar file contents as well as you need everything. So that is when, if you have this along with your project. So now for this, you have to create your project structure, where along with the main Java, you should also have the web app folder and the contents in it, because this is the default file which will define how your project should be run, which means when you click on your web application on your URL, you should be getting a default content and a web page. So that you have to define. So that's when, if you go back to the structure, what was that directory structure? So you need to define all those things specific to it. So this web app folder as well as the config folder will have the details. So without it, it will not create. So that's what I'm saying. Maven is quite smart enough where it can do everything, whereas if you provide the directory structure and you follow the life cycle.
But here I need to provide in test as well as Java folders. I mean that source main I have, right? The same thing, source test folder. I need to create the web apps and whatever the config folder in test folder also. No need, right?
Not on the test. Testing is only needed for testing whatever files you have here on the source. So if you recall,
Okay.
for every source file that is available in the main.java, I said you will be having a corresponding test.java. So it is not for all these things. If you say XML file, you are not going to test that XML file. You are basically going to use it additionally with the content that you have here. So that is how the test will be specific to this. And these folders are required in case if you have anything in the test.java that for verifying or running it, you have a dependency that you will specify. You don't need this here, because this is only for creating a web application on top of your actual Java files.
If it is ER artifact, the structure will be different, the
It is the
directory
same,
structure.
but in addition to this, you will be putting certain licensed file. That is what I said, the difference between var and EAR in the beginning. Var and EAR both the same, wherein you will be using it for an application that is web application. But the difference is in EAR, additionally, you will be putting certain licensed files specific to your enterprise. So that is how when you run that web application, you will be running it with a specific license. So that depends on what kind of enterprise web application that you are giving. Based on that, they will be putting certain files into this filters or into the config. So specific on the project, they will be adding more files. Only then it will be called as a EAR.
For testing purpose, can I do like MVN archetype colon generate while it is asking some ID, group ID version and the packaging type, right? Can I do there where or it is not?
Anything you can do. There's no
Yeah,
restriction. See,
it
I'm
will
showing
create,
you
right, that structure.
exactly. I'm showing you an example where you can understand. Now, if you can understand the Java project type, then go ahead and give a specific type when you're creating the project. Based on that, it will create all the directory structure. So now, for doing all those things, you need to know different kind of project types in Java, and you should understand the Java very well. Only then you can do. But if you know there is no restriction, you can go ahead and run. Maven will not say anything because based on what option you give for the archetype generate, it is going to create a dummy structure or the directory based on which you will be putting some files inside it. So you can go ahead and give an option.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.